Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Akil, and today's episode is all about becoming a better software engineer. And it turns out that non-technical topics are more important than technical ones. Joining me today is Fardjad Davari, software engineer and a strong believer in collaborative software design, simplicity and autonomy. It doesn't matter if you're early in career or a seasoned software engineer. This episode is for you. So enjoy.
I think the best way to learn anything is to build something, and especially if it's technical. And similarly, when it comes to skills, also the best way to learn is to put yourself in a situation where you have to use those skills and try different things, fail, and see what works and what doesn't. So that's what I always do.
I fully agree with you that like a clear goal, especially from a learning aspect, is really going to help drive and move you forward to it. For me, those goals have always come kind of professionally, because on a personal level, I'm like, man, I do technical stuff professionally. Do I want to do that on a personal level? I usually go wide, and I have other hobbies than more technical things. But I really admire people that like see a new language, want to play around with it, have a really good use case, and then execute on that.
Yeah, indeed.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Well, you do remember StackOverflow, like when it was not like on decline because of AI. No, I don't know if it's really on decline, but I think I saw like some report that shows that things are not very well. But back then, what was super interesting was that there was a community that was focusing on teaching people or consulting people in identifying the problem and solving that. And language didn't matter. Like if you looked at the contributions of top users of StackOverflow, you would see that they answer questions from a wide range of tags and technologies. But they always had this approach that they communicated back and forth with the person who asked the question to understand why they have this problem, and then avoid the XY problem situation. Do you know about XY?
No.
So XY is a situation where someone who's like an expert or not an expert, someone who wants to solve a problem thinks that the solution to their problem is something. They go and ask about that a special solution or that special thing that they're stuck on. And then that leads to wasted time and effort from other people because others help with that particular thing, whereas this might not be the actual solution to the problem that they had. Or this might be the wrong problem to solve. So it's always better to go with the real intention that you have or the requirement that led to a technical solution, and maybe someone has a better idea or a better approach. And sometimes like the tools that you're using, for example, in the StackOverflow, we're talking about that. So regular expression is a very popular tag, and people try to, for example, parse HTML with that, but this is not built for that, right? So HTML is not a regular language. So a lot of questions are, a lot of answers are, just don't use this.
Don't do that.
Do something else.
That's quite funny. Like most of the questions that like that pop up for me is you're talking to a person that loves Go, and at CB I also give Go foundational trainings. And recently I did that at Bol.com, for example. And then people ask, okay, what if I want to do X, Y, and Z in Go? And then it's like, okay, I can answer that question, but it's more of a question of, okay, do you want that? Why would you want that? And that's usually the approach I take. And then people are like, maybe this is not a good use case, or maybe I shouldn't do this in the first place. But then from a curiosity perspective, they're like, but still.
Absolutely, but sometimes also trying dumb ideas, or I don't know, like the things that you think are not going to work is very rewarding.
It is.
So like you do something just to learn what goes wrong and how how far they can go in terms of being wrong. So that's also a good way of learning, I think. So
I think so too. I mean, for me, I'm always trying to balance technical depth and technical skills versus other skills that I think I need as well. And maybe it's because I'm a specific type of person, but I see a lot of things that are interesting to me. Like curiosity is a big driver. I've done a year of product management, and I think that still is fascinating. Yet I still miss the kind of hands-on experience. And I like technical depth, but I don't have that like inkling to do it on a personal level. Like with my personal time, I like facing challenges professionally and like solving those goals either by myself or with a team. Usually with a team gives me more fulfillment. So balancing then technical skills as a software engineer versus other skills that I think I need has always been tricky.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I like that you use the word balance because there needs to be a balance. And I think we had some conversations earlier about like how do you like balance technical stuff and non-technical stuff. And yeah, it looks like a common misconception here is that a lot of people think that building software is mostly about knowing your tech and how to use technologies and how to put things together. But yeah, all other skills that are required, if you put them on the table, maybe they get a bigger portion of your time, or I don't know, like they might be even more important than the technical things to do something right or to build something that's useful.
Yeah. I wonder if that's, so I think I agree with that. Like if I look at my time spent previously on successfully deploying software to production, whether it be a first release or a continuous release or a new added feature, I don't know if it's the fact that I was in an organization with aligning with people with different kind of goals and agendas and interests, that's why like the non-technical side or the non-technical skill was not necessarily needed, but more of the aligning people or figuring out what the right value is or what problems to solve. I don't know if it's because of me being part of an organization. Let's say if you and me do a startup and we have just the two of us, probably we align quite quickly and then we start from scratch. So the building part of it, more of the technical side, is going to be at the forefront.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well, when you have a smaller team, of course, the challenge of communication or like splitting the roles is less important because like there are two people, everyone knows that they need to take different roles, and you probably have the same mindset or same goals when you want to start a business with somebody else, right? So that's very unlikely that you want something totally different or need to sit like I don't know
for hours
and talk.
It's not going to work.
Yeah. But when the organization gets bigger, the challenge of people also increases. So you have to find a common ground with others, make sure that everybody knows where they need to go, make sure that there's safety for everyone to speak up and come up with new ideas, of course, right? So and make everyone happy so that they don't feel like the I don't know, code monkeys and just executing orders.
Yeah.
And these are all the non-technical aspects of building software or building anything, I think. So yeah, it's not very technical,
no.
especially at scale.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering, because we had this conversation before the show, and I was wondering why that is the case, right? That there is this notion that creating software is like a super technical job. I mean, I agree to a certain point where the people aspect is huge. I wonder if it grew like that because right now, if you look at knowledge, like a lot of stuff is out there online. With AI, we now have intelligence as well. So when we're trying to figure out something or from a learning perspective, information is out there. And maybe 20 years ago, it was not as much out there. I mean, definitely so. And it has gradually increased. So getting something up and running was already a skill in and of its own. And now getting something up and running gets easier and easier. So it's, I think, more about solving the right problems and finding alignment and then being productive and effective with what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a set of problems that require a lot of specialized knowledge and a lot of focus on just the technicalities of how things work.
Yeah.
Like, for example, if you create a database or like the kernel of an operating system, of course, that's mostly about like the technicalities of how things work. Even then, you still have to have like a community and a lot of people who who you would want them to contribute to the project and all sorts of things. So again, people aspect is there too. But if you're solving business problems like in a company, of course, it's less about I don't know, like building something super technical, and it's more about like you said, talking to stakeholders, understanding the problem, prioritizing things, and making sure that you're going in the right direction. Like sometimes things are not very clear, but at least you have to take bets and make decisions, and then collaboration, of course, taking these bets becomes super important in this setup. And you do this with all of your like communication skills mostly, and use less of your coding skills to move forward in there. Yeah, so I think it has to do with scale and the types of problems that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I wonder if for someone starting out, like they will absolutely likely focus on their technical skills, right? Because usually that's the barrier of entry. Can we execute? Can we see that you learn? Can you think on the fly? But the communication is going to be a huge aspect of that in and of its own already. I'm wondering what your advice is for people that are more so starting out. What would be the tipping point where indeed they kind of have hard skills and then they focus more on soft skills? Because I've also seen people where they think they know a lot of hard skills and they focus very much on soft skills, and then they try and leverage because of, for example, product managers. They might have a certain technical background and they use that to drive decisions forward, but it's not really their responsibility anymore. So like, I feel like that tipped in the wrong skill then with regards to hard skills and kind of the responsibilities they have.
Well, there are two. I think you mentioned two things. So one is like the separation of responsibilities, which is an interesting topic on its own. So let's talk about this after the career path. But if you look at the software engineering as a career path, of course, when you're an entry-level person joining an organization or a team, the expectation of the organization and the expectation of you from yourself should be to just have influence just on yourself, like learn how to work with the code base and how to do the basic things that are expected from you. So this is the entry level. Then you grow a little bit, like you learn the skills and you manage to have like a balance between using your technical skills and like talking to different people, and then you become a media engineer. And as a media engineer, your area of influence is mostly your team or your peers, and the expectation from you is always on that level. So you have to have the right skills to be able to communicate with the people that you often work with. And after working with people, of course, you get a feel for how things work and who you should listen to. You probably have some other senior people in the team who make some tough decisions and whatnot. And then you become even more senior, and then you have to have more influence. So the more you move forward in your career, of course, you have to find ways to communicate with a broader set of audience and talk to more people. And then your communication skills need to be stronger and stronger. And then you probably even won't have enough time to use your technical skills as much as you had like when you were a mid-level or an entry-level engineer. And that's why a lot of, architects or, people who have to talk with many different teams, and people don't write code. And like, for example, a product person, of course, a product person needs to talk with a lot of stakeholders and do a lot of coordinations and make decisions and whatnot. So even if that person has technical skills, probably they can contribute, but maybe it's not their job to do that anymore, because there are more interesting things for them to do.
I've thought about it, because that's the part I miss. And then indeed, what you mentioned really was also in my head. Like, there's only one person that does all the other things, basically. So my time is better spent doing that rather than scratching this itch that I have for fulfillment.
Yeah. But also I don't like separating concerns, or like the interpretation of separation of concerns when it comes to some technical stuff. So for example, they say that, I want one person to take care of database and for infrastructure, and I want one person to take care of, something else in technical stuff. And then you create basically silos and communication overhead between those people. And also about talking with the stakeholders, so when you say that, an engineer's job is to just write code and turn specifications that are pre-written into like some solutions. And then the job of like a person who communicates with the stakeholders is just to talk to them and then write those as specifications. I don't think that's a winning combination. So there needs to be some kind of overlap, or at least some involvement, like across these different aspects for for something meaningful to happen.
I fully agree. Like, I've been experimenting with that when we kick off a new milestone that we're going to research and design, then I want to involve everyone. That's what I've done a few times. But then I've noticed that involving everyone, the full engineering team, very early on when things are very unclear, their feedback has been, well, things were very unclear.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, that, like, it makes sense. So now I'm experimenting with only involving a few people. And then when things are more clear, like communicating that more, which would be more like the time spent on communicating then later on is bigger. But things might be more clear, but then we might not catch everything in advance. So it's kind of trade-offs that I'm trying to figure out. I've also, like, I fully agree with you where we do need feedback from stakeholders. I fully allow the team. I mean, it's not even an allow. They know basically they can reach out to whomever. But then the opposite, that's where I'm like, okay, sometimes that's not always the best thing, where people and stakeholders directly reach out to the team, not just through a product person with regards to priorities or when is what done. And then that kind of amps the stress level of the team. So that I'm a bit more cautious of, maybe a bit more mindful and guarding in, I would say.
Yeah, I would say like going through product person is some kind of solution to a problem, right? And if we look at the problem, is that there's no structure or no common understanding of how things should work to build a software. And when a stakeholder that has like some kind of urgent need and has no context of everything else that's happening to the team, reaching out to the team, when that happens, of course, things could go wrong, right? But then this is the problem. And you could also solve this in multiple different ways. So for example, if you have some collaborative sessions with those stakeholders where everyone are there and you do this like very often, then of course they can still talk, but they also walk out the room very happy because they co-create with the team and the team kind of understands the perspective of the stakeholder and you kind of like let them into the process of building the product. So I think this is a more effective approach than the proxy approach. Of course, I know that you didn't mean the proxy, but
no.
Yeah, I think a very, very common pitfall I see in many teams is that, of course, because they want to be very protective of the priorities, they put proxies. And then that's also like a route to many problems.
I think that's what I did early on. Like, because product management was new to me, I was like, well, it makes sense that things go through me. Like, that's what I've seen from the software engineering hat, let's say. But then I realized that I'm a bottleneck. Like, and if I'm not available, things either come to a standstill. People don't know what to do. So then opening up those communication lines has been really helpful. Indeed, co-creating also. I mean, we haven't had any co-creating sessions, but complete transparency with regards to demos, what we're doing, what we are going to do, what works well, what doesn't work well, our learnings as well from retros. That's all been shared. So that really helps. I think get a common understanding of what goes on. And then the heft of my time has been educating other people how to create software, basically.
Exactly.
When there's a roadmap and we have a million items running in parallel and everything is high priority, I'm like, this is not how reality is, basically. We have to scratch that, wipe it off the table. And people get really scared. But then we have a better way of working and all of a sudden people are happy because we deliver what is promised.
Exactly. And that's like how the team grows, right? And the stakeholders can grow with you as well. Like they learn how to think along with you and everything will become better as you do it more, I think.
But for me, the funny part is, so I can leverage the technical experience to kind of go against certain processes that have been put in place or certain status quos because I have a vision of, okay, this is what I believe in. And if someone doesn't agree, we have a conversation, basically. And I'm not black and white. Like I am quite flexible with regards to my thinking, but I also believe in something. So that's what I stand for and that's what I'll fight for. For people that come into positions and they might not have the right background, I do see a lot of people kind of going with the flow, following status quo. Why are we doing this? Well, that's what I got taught, or that's something that we've always done. And that's where I'm like, we don't really improve or we don't really innovate. And sometimes I think that's a shame.
I think the worst thing that you could do to yourself or the environment that you operate in is to just like follow. And following is good. Of course, if you want to change anything or if you want to challenge the status quo, it's probably best to walk a mile in other people's shoes and then start to talk. But of course, like at some point, you have to be a little bit critical and then use your critical thinking skills to come up with some improvements for yourself, for your environment, for the product that you're working on. And of course, like, if you just go along and don't challenge anything, then it's not good for you and not good for the organization and the environment that you operate on.
Yeah. I feel like when you touched on kind of the different stages in your career, like very early on, looking at your own sphere of influence, trying to be effective and productive in what you're doing and solving the right problems, and then kind of going beyond from that team aspect, I think that's where it starts when you're looking into, okay, what makes this team effective? Not just me as an individual, but what processes or what ways of working are there and what's my opinion on them? Because I feel like not everyone has an opinion, but when you actually look and see and think, if you were to be responsible, would you do the same things? That's when it kind of, you might think, oh, that I'm reinventing the wheel. But for me, that's where it starts, right? If you have through critical thinking, if you have a good idea, I like the flexibility of trying things out and experimenting. And teams that experiment, for me, they're always learning, basically. So that's definitely what I advocate for.
Indeed. Yeah, even sometimes those experiments are the things that have been tried before, and maybe they're somehow controversial, or I don't know, the industry might think that, this is not the right way of doing things. But still, like, there's value in trying different ideas and seeing why it doesn't work and how. Of course, like, there needs to be a limit or a balance in there. But I think you should never say that we're not going to ever try something because, I read somewhere that it doesn't work,
Yeah, I mean, that's the sad thing from certain leadership, or what I've seen going from organization to organization. There is kind of this aspect of, do I let people experiment or do I prevent mistakes that I know are going to be mistakes? And I am more so of the mindset of let people make mistakes. You give advice. If they don't follow it, let them learn. And then there's kind of the balance of how big of a mistakes do you allow and stand for when it comes to like security or really impacts critical paths, then maybe you're a bit more strict. But when it comes to something innovation, like, let people learn, let people fail and grow from there. But I've also seen people where it's like, no, this is what I know, which means I've tried it. And then that's more of the black and white thinking, which I don't like.
No. And you won't be able to influence anybody to follow the like, let's say you're a leader for somewhere, and you want to lead other people to follow a vision. And if they don't experiment some kind of experience some kind of pain, or if they don't experiment with different solutions that they have in their minds and understand why they don't work that way and why they should go your way, they will never listen to you. So one thing to do is to enable the team to do experiments and fail fast without making a lot of cost or casualties. And then let them after they realize and learn what could go wrong, then you tell them, hey, I have a solution for the problems that you're facing, and then they will listen to you much better and they will follow you, and that's how you also gain credibility. And when people say leadership without authority and whatnot, so that's, I think, in line with this way of working, and not the approach that, hey, I say that you should do this today, and listen to me because I say so, and I have tried everything that.
Like the collaboration aspect, it's really what I enjoy. Thoroughly talking to people, figuring out what the right problems are to solve, testing also on production. When I first joined a project and we did a lot of A/B testing, honestly, my mind was blown. It was like, oh, everyone thinks it's this, now it's this. E-commerce, someone clicks on a product tile, it opens up in a new tab. From a user perspective, I hate that. From a conversion perspective, it worked wonders. Well, then you don't have a leg to stand on. Basically, that's what we do to optimize conversion, even though personal preference, they keep that out of there. But that's thoroughly something I enjoy. I've also worked with engineers, and I don't know where that mindset sometimes comes from, but they really get the energy out of technology, innovation with regards to technology. And for me, that's not always what a business needs. There's a very specific niche where you really solve interesting problems from a technology standpoint. I recently had a conversation with Bob van Luit. He's the CEO of Weaviate, vector search database. Very interesting problem. You're creating a database with vector search capabilities with regards to embeddings, like those are probably very specific technical problems. When we're talking about the majority of businesses, they're not going to be all database companies.
Yeah.
They don't all need that level of expertise, which means the engineers that work there need to solve business problems. And those might not be the most interesting problems from a technical aspect.
Yeah. Or some business problems that they face, or some problems that customers bring to them could stem from, like, for example, the wrong use of their technology, or maybe because they have more experience with certain things, they can nudge their customers in a direction that they use the technology in a way, or they change the problem a little bit and, I don't know, refine it and hammer on the problem so that they can solve it with the tools in a much better way. And that's also like something that's super important. And so it's, again, we got back to the point where it's not technical, even when it's in a very technical domain.
What I've seen is that some people, like those types of engineers that I'm describing, they still try and find a way to work on innovative technology professionally, even though that's not what a business might need. And that's where I see things sometimes also go wrong, where you see like an exotic technology all of a sudden be a backbone of an infrastructure or an organization, where it's all of a sudden hard to hire people or find people that really know what's going on in this set of the code base or this set of the technology. I don't know how to solve that. Like, for those types of engineers, would it be better if they're not in that organization, or an organization which tailors more towards very specific niche problems? I don't know how to solve that, but I have noticed that not every business problem is interesting for engineers.
Yeah, it's I guess it's when we talk about individuals, of course, like when we talk about the behavior of an individual and when it doesn't match with what you expect inside an organization, the easy answer is to say, yeah, well, this engineer is, having is not a match, or is not a fit. But it's always a little, I think it's more nuanced than that, because the environment you're in also has a lot of influence on how people work.
Yeah.
Imagine that you work in an environment where there are so many like shackles around you, and then you're not really allowed to experiment or talk, or I don't know, you're not involved in anything. So these people will probably fall back to playing with technology and want to just touch the technology because that's their that's the amount of authority that they have, and they want to use it. And they want to feel good doing those types of things, right? So if your organization gives like space to people to grow into having that type of mindset, then you can expect people to like show that behavior, and you can like work on growing that aspect in their behavior. So I think this is also very important when we are talking about individual performances, that your environment should also cater for it.
Yeah. The environment having influence on like the behavior of people is something I've really underestimated. I've been in organizations where, I mean, coming from Xiba, we go from organization to organization. You have a preference in how you execute, which is sometimes against processes or status quo.
Yeah.
By virtue of trying to be effective in executing. And that blows people's minds sometimes. It's like, oh, this is what you can do, and this is no longer needed, and this is actually not useful. It's quite funny to have that, because from my personal side, like I go from organization to organization. I have done that quite often. And for people that have been within the same organization, they are kind of, not part of the wallpaper, but those processes are like ingrained in their behavior. And it might be eye-opening to then have a fresh perspective. And I don't know what would happen if those people would go to another organization and kind of bring that like experience with them.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
I think it's funny to have that realization. I don't know if I would advise like going from organization to organization, but there is a lot to learn from looking behind the scenes of what goes on.
Yeah.
And outward facing, I always wonder.
Well, I think the disadvantage of going from one organization to another too fast is that you don't stay there to see the outcome of your decisions or other people's decisions that you have witnessed during your time in that organization.
Yeah.
But if you manage to somehow find a way to keep in touch with people, and like we say, customer intimacy for like a part of the Zebia core values. Of course, like if you manage to find a way to do that, then of course you can like learn and take those experiences somewhere else. What I see in consultancy a lot is that people join an organization, bring like a solution or a toolbox of the solutions, and they build the same thing as the other organization, and they move on and do the exact same thing, and then the whole industry gets affected by that, or like a large portion of clients and companies get affected by that. But that's not like the best that you could do, you know. So it's always good to find ways to get some meaningful feedback about what you're doing, and be critical about your solutions as well before you move on to your next challenge. And I think that's also very important for people to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's interesting because for me, the best we can do is very subjective, right? And it needs to be a match with what the organization wants. If we have an amazing technical solution, but that's not what a business wants, because the business wants speed and validation of assumptions, then it's kind of a mismatch, right? And then looking from a certain lens, you can say that's an amazing solution, or looking from another one, you can say that's a complete mismatch, which makes it not an amazing solution.
Yeah, but also thinking along with people that have those specifications and want those solutions can be very rewarding and useful. Like if you just go to an organization and then do what they say without talking to them, and maybe like teaching them how to like think about some aspects that they haven't thought about, then they might actually change their opinion and say, oh, no, actually, I don't want this solution. I want you to advise me on what solution I need. And then you co-create. And then it's much better, I think, than just execution.
Yeah, this is like an amplified version of the Stack Overflow example that you gave. Where there's a certain ask, and it's like, is this the right way to do it? Or should we do this in the first place? Or what are the other options on the table?
Indeed.
It's very hard though, when like time is tough and it's crunch time, people usually panic. And that's exactly the opposite of what I think you should do, because then it's like, okay, the decisions that we make, they matter, or really do they? At least we have to verify the assumptions that we have, and that's going to take time. But it's time well spent, basically. If we go in a certain direction, it's a bigger bet, which means the losses will be more severe.
Yes.
But that's usually what I see happens. Like panic mode, someone says this direction, it's like all in, it's go time.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
But that's also very human though. Like the funny thing is, there are a lot of human aspects within organizations. I wonder, like maybe it's because I've been recently talking to a lot of people that are in smaller organizations and have more responsibilities just by virtue of being in a startup phase, what that environment looks like. Because then you're dealing with a smaller set of people, less people problems, I think, or maybe when there are problems, they're more severe just by virtue of having less people. But the environment's very different, which means also the learnings from an engineering side are going to be very different in the first place as well.
Yeah. So you see that, for example, a startup with 7 people can challenge the biggest organizations with many, many people and unlimited resources. And the reason, I think, is kind of related to the way that you describe this startup environment. People communicate with each other better. The kinds of problems that they run into are very visible, because that's like a very small group, and then people who can take action are usually part of this group in which they notice that these problems exist. And well, if you want to solve a problem, you're just like one call away, or I don't know, like a few steps away from your colleague's desk to talk about it and then address it. But in a large organization, so a team might be suffering, and you have to wait for the next, I don't know, performance review, or I don't know, metric review session to see that, oh, this team actually suffers based on the metrics that we defined. And then you have to go down and then talk to that team. You know, sometimes these hierarchies and those processes that we have, I'm not judging them, but in general, like the pitfall or the problem is that they can make things very slow, and they might kind of like turn into a handicap for you to understand what's happening in the organization and which areas could use some improvements. So yeah, I think that's it's very nice to have a lot of resources and a lot of people to rely on, have backups and whatnot. But at the same time, it's very nice to be effective and reachable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Zooming in on that hierarchy, because I agree that's also what I've seen. I've now seen organizations trend more towards engineering managers, for example, that are always have a certain technical aspect of their role. And they try and steer for 50-50, and then it's probably up to the person what that balance looks like. But I like that there's people responsible for personal development and growth within certain teams that also do hands-on work and that are not like fully all in only people management, which I think is a good thing. For organizations with more hierarchy, that's where I've seen leadership or managers actually be out of code. And then it's very hard to get buy-in, like to get even on a level of empathy, like figure out what people are dealing with, or from a person that's a software engineer, like having an understanding that my manager understands my problems. Because if they don't experience the problems, then how can they? Because the problems from 10 years ago, not the same problems anymore.
Yeah, indeed.
Like those are more problems that I see with that type of hierarchy then.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Exactly. So there's a book called It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work.
Okay.
So it has some very good ideas, or I don't know, controversial ideas as well about how you should run a business. So it's about people who run the company Basecamp, and also they have a service, hey.com, like these different services.
Yeah.
And so in one of the first chapters, there's a sentence that I like a lot. So your company is a product and you're responsible for building this product. People inside the company need to know how to use this product and your product needs to have a good user experience. So think about this and then apply this. And then, of course, like it doesn't matter how large your organization is. So you still have to create some process, or think about, not processes, or like think about a mechanism there for detecting problems, as addressing them as soon as you can, and running the whole business more efficiently. So I think,
it sounds fascinating to me. Yeah, like from I think an early age. Well, I think this is what I wrote down on my high school. It's like at some point I want to own my own company. And I feel like now time is catching up. I am talking to people and it's very inspiring to see how they do that. And like having a company, treating it as your product and like building and growing that out.
Yeah.
I still think it's an ambition of mine. It's something that at some point I'm going to dive deep in and try and experiment. I wonder if for you it's the same, because you have a lot of organizational knowledge, a lot of theoretical knowledge. I don't know what your ambitions are with regards to your own path.
Yeah, at some point.
At some point?
Well, yeah, I like... Well, I'm not sure if at this moment I'm ready for the challenges of running a full business. And of course, it needs some knowledge on that front too. So I'm mostly like involved with technical problems, and not necessarily like those technical, but tech roles, like staff engineer, like principal engineer, these types of roles. And to run a company and to know about business, it's just like a whole different world.
Yeah.
And of course, at some point I will be ready for that. I'm going to definitely try that.
That's nice.
Yeah.
I like that we share that ambition. Like I talked to another colleague of ours. I'll introduce you in a bit. I think he's in now. But what's holding him back is like a really good idea. And I could see that. Like, I think I have many ideas, but to be like, okay, this is the idea I want to execute in is hard for me. I've seen very successful organizations building around and tailoring towards developers by virtue of having like an open core, either starting a community around something open source and building a platform around that, or starting with something closed source and then opening it up and building a community around that. Tailoring towards developers seems like a very attractive and fun business model, to be honest, because that's when you also kind of keep that technical as core of your business.
Yeah, I think if I built something that would probably be related to developer tooling, or something that has technical people as the customers, like some B2B business model. But you mentioned something very interesting about ideas. I think in this age and in this era, like having an idea, well, it's very good, but that's not the most important thing. Everything is like collage, right? Because people have figured out a lot of different problems. So it's about building a product. So you need to figure out what would solve a problem, or which like portion of the market you can target, find a niche, do something different, and then build a user base around this. And I think this would be more challenging than like necessarily coming up with an idea, at least to me, and then like building around that idea. So having the sense of how to build a useful product and how to build a user base around it, I think is much more challenging.
Yeah. And I feel like looking at that, and that's my ambition, it's not a skill that I'm developing. And if that's going to be the most crucial part, it's like, how do I develop that is what I'm wondering recently.
Yeah.
I saw a video that OpenAI released, I think yesterday, when it comes to a new functionality they have. They call it deep research, where you, for example, from a product sense, are analyzing the market and you're saying, okay, this is my context, this is what I'm looking at. Can you give me data on X, Y, and Z? And it might take 10 minutes for this program to actually crawl whatever information sources it can find online or not, and then give you the answers that you're looking for, actually doing the research for you with regards to market segment, user penetration, and so on and so forth. Like that, for me, the tooling is getting more and more advanced to indeed figure out what the right problems are to solve. And that's, for me, very exciting.
Yeah. Wow. Finally, very exciting. Yeah. Okay, so here comes an interesting or controversial take on AI. Now, I think many of the problems that are currently being solved with AI are not really problems that you should, with Gen AI mostly, I mean, like, are not the kind of problems that you should solve with Gen AI.
Okay.
But like the type of problems that require search, like in a very large, corpus of data, I think that's where these tools can excel. And of course, like this tool that you described sounds like a very, very good application of this functionality. Yeah, I'll definitely try that.
Well, you have to pay $200 a month. You have to have like the highest tier license,
right?
But it will be available at some point.
Yeah,
like I agree with you. Like I like the funness of generating content. I don't know how much it has influenced social media or my LinkedIn, for example. I see people make a lot of assumptions that, this is bots or this is fake and this is generated. I have no clue, to be honest. Like for me, those are all assumptions. But it's the fact that people have that tool like very, very readily available. I can see how that happens, basically. For me, indeed, it's going to be leveraging whatever manual process is and automating that. But even that, from what I've seen, like the embeddings in a vector search database, it's very similar to like search and keyword rankings and stuff like that. Like they are still software engineering problems that we're having and that we're solving, not necessarily data science problems. Although data science people are now actually playing around with Gen AI and LLMs, which I think is quite interesting. Like that's how a lot of those facets and worlds are colliding and coming together.
Yeah.
When I played around with embeddings, I was playing around and a colleague actually said, this is what Elasticsearch does, basically under the hood. And this might be slightly different, but then you also have variances. And how do you split up your embeddings? There's different variances, and that's also quite relatable to how you do search. I thought it was quite funny.
Yeah. So one question for you. Do you think that with all these advancements, the number of skills that a person as someone who works in an IT organization or as someone who calls themselves a software engineer is increasing? Like, for example, maybe 10 years ago, you would be like a backend developer or a front-end developer or a database engineer. Now, you are all of these things at the same time in one team. The newsletter example that you mentioned in the beginning is another top 10 engineering skills, right? So maybe like in the future, it's expected from, do you think that it's the case that it will be expected from software engineers to also know those kinds of skills and then wear more hats than they are wearing today?
Yeah. For me, it's going to be, it depends on the organization. Like what I've seen is when, especially during COVID, for example, while people are being hired, people are also being laid off. And the people that were laid off were more specialists in the type of work they're doing, right? If I have a generalist that can do kind of a little bit of everything and times are tough and I have to make decisions, then a specialist that can only do one thing is someone that I might let go of compared to the other, basically. And now with tooling and intelligence, I think learning is going to be faster. So it depends on, the organization, what is expected of you as an engineer, indeed. I think you can do a lot, but I've always believed that with a small team, you can achieve a lot. That's even without AI. Like what the cloud provides us in kind of reducing a total cost of ownership from a team and certain decisions that you can make in your infrastructure to have things up and running smoothly with almost zero operational overhead. I think that was already there. So now if we go even smaller, so if I don't look at a team of 4 people, but a team of 1, a team of 1 is also risky, right? If I have software as the backbone of my organization and I have one person responsible, that person gets hit by a bus, I'm just screwed. So then am I going to have 2? Well, if both are on holiday, then that's also a problem. So I will always have to have, I think, a team of people that executes.
Yeah, but now the cross-functional aspect of teams, I think, with the recent advancement can be stronger.
Yeah.
So like instead of having one person who knows about one thing, you could have like multiple people who might not be specialized in everything, but who can have like a wide range of skills, or who can deal with problems in different domains.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of exciting for the future.
I think so too. Yeah. Like for me, that team aspect, I hope, is going to play a very crucial part in that, because a team that knows each other, that knows, for example, I know what your preferences are, I know what you're good at, I know what your learning path is, or what you want to grow in ambitions. You know that of me as well. And we have kind of the experience to communicate effectively with each other just by virtue of having done many things and going through like rough times and good times, basically. That makes a team resilient, right?
Yeah.
And new people can come in and people can go, but the core of that team will be stable, I feel like, which means that if it's a problem and you and I both haven't kind of figured that out yet, we'll be like, oh, we'll figure it out, right? Yeah. Because I feel like you can be way more confident in the team and your role in that team than maybe sometimes in an individual, because you have your own insecurities. You might be like, oh, this is a whole lot of responsibility for a whole lot I don't know.
Yeah.
So that team aspect is going to be very crucial, I feel like.
Yeah, exactly. And now the whole team can actually go and solve problems instead of splitting the problem and saying, hey, you do this part, just focus on this part, and the other person just focuses on the other part. And then you, in the end, integrate these things. Yeah.
Which is going to take the longest. Yeah. Like for me, the only problem I see is like this chicken and egg, where there's a lot of knowledge out there. You can learn quite quickly, but this foundational knowledge that you need in experience, you will always need experience. And for people that are coming into organizations, indeed, if they get that generic role, or it is expected of them to kind of do a little bit of everything, just by virtue of having intelligence, so knowledge and learning goes faster, they will miss the experience of having done that specifically for a little bit longer.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's a valid concern, but that's what I've seen. Like if I were to be responsible for front end, back end, and a little bit of product, I've done all 3 like as a specialist sole responsibility, which makes me more comfortable to do that. And then within a team, that can be my comfort and there can be other discomfort in other parts of the team. But then together you figure it out. If you have a new person which hasn't had any type of experience, but all of a sudden starts very generalistic, I don't know how that's going to grow.
Oh, so maybe their balance is to swing between the different roles. Like sometimes you can be a very specialized person in one area, and then you can go back to becoming like more of a generic person or a generic role. And then if you keep doing it, then you kind of like accumulate some knowledge, and at the same time you are not disconnected from some areas that you often don't touch when you're like a specialist focusing on just one aspect of the job or the problem. So based on this conversation, I think swinging is a good thing.
Yeah, I think so too. The funny thing for me is when I started out, like I might not have had the best foundational knowledge because I didn't have a traditional education, computer science, but then I found myself being very good at executing. But then certain things executing, I was like, man, this is taking a long time. I have to Google things and I'm not quite sure with regards to what I should do or which direction. Like, and that's when I realized like my foundational knowledge needed some tweaking. So then I swung back and forth between executing and working on that more foundational knowledge. And that I think has really helped. But now you're in a position where you might not have the right foundational knowledge yet. And that's going to be, I think, crucial, where we figure out how to get the right level of foundational knowledge to be comfortable in executing and then learning on the go. Because the biggest skill, I agree with you, is still going to be learning. And now it's just going to be amplified and you're going to have more tools to learn faster. But time is still the same, which means, it's going to be a funny way of working, I think.
Yeah, indeed.
Cool, man. I've really enjoyed this conversation, Fardjad. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, same for me. I have lots of food for thought.
Yeah, same
this.
here.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to re-listen to this because I think this was a good one.
Yes, thank you very much for hosting this.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on. I'm going to round it off here. If you're still listening, if you're still with us, like the episode if you liked it. Let us know in the comment section what you thought, and we'll see you on the next one.